into the shadows, where I hope you find peace in the dark. The stories I narrate are handpicked week by week. If you find yourself enjoying these tales, please consider giving a like. And without further ado, let's get into it. Maybe the national parks aren't just there to protect the nature. Big Bend National Park. The sign announced my arrival in the familiar font of all official Park Service communication. The ranger's booth beyond it grew large as I approached. I slowed to a halt alongside the squat yellow hut and paused my podcast I had been listening to on the drive there. "Afternoon, friend." The attending ranger greeted me with a bored smile that reached barely to the corners of her mouth. I nodded my head in response. "Entrance fee increased to $30 this year," she intoned. "We can take cash or charge." I fished my wallet from the backpack on the seat next to me and handed her two 20s. She returned a 10, but kept a hold of the bill as she handed it through the window. "Be safe out there." We locked eyes, and she fixed me with a meaningful glare that seemed to say that she was more concerned with my behavior than my safety. "And don't talk to the animals." She relinquished the change, and I shook my head, marveling at the strange warning, and drove on, hitting play on my phone. Indeed, listener, it's best if you don't acknowledge these creatures at all. The podcaster pronounced this final sentence of the program in a tone that he no doubt imagined to convey solemn gravity. Cheesy music and a cheap howling wind sound effect signaled the end of the episode. I fiddled my phone and, tapping into a playlist I labeled Old News, the Eagles crooned back at me. "For that want to own me, two that want to stone me, one says she's a friend of mine." The sound cut out. I wrestled with the auxiliary cord that connected my phone to my car speakers, and I glanced at the home screen. No service. I stared at the now useless brick for a moment before turning my attention back to the road in front of me. Without my primary source of entertainment, I scanned through the radio stations, hoping to find something other than the breathless preaching that dominated the airways outside of the state's major population centers. I found only static. Admitting defeat, I turned my focus from the dashboard to get the proper look at my surroundings. Tall yellow grass grew mysteriously from rocky soil that did not appear capable of supporting life. Crooked trees, all limbs bent in impossible angles from the terrain. The scrubland, dotted with cacti, gave way to jagged mountains that stretched far into the horizon. The foliage seemed to grow thicker with elevation. Across the alien landscape, tiny roadrunners bolted back and forth, chasing some elusive prey on their impossibly fast little legs. Or, I chuckled to myself, perhaps they were eluding a dim-witted coyote. My car jolted as if I'd hit a pothole. The explosion of feathers across my windshield, however, indicated that the bump had not been the result of a shortfall of the park's maintenance. I cursed aloud. The view had distracted me. I resolved the focus to the road rather than the environment, figuring there'd be time enough to appreciate the majesty of nature during my hike. A nearby sign indicated the Lost Mines Trail, my destination, after all, to be several miles further. After another eerily silent half an hour on the road, I reached the trailhead. A smiling older couple, each wielded two walking sticks, lumbered on the path as I pulled nearby into a parking space. I collected my phone from the dashboard and my backpack from the seat next to me, along with my boots from the floor. Stepped out of the car and I stretched my legs and popped the trunk. The older gentleman, presumably husband to his hiking partner, walked around behind my car and greeted me with a friendly wave as I set change to my shoes. "Looks like you'll have a trail all to yourself this afternoon, pal." He flourished his hand magnanimously at the empty parking spaces around us. Didn't see anyone else up there? I pulled on my dusty brown boots as he shook his head. Nope, just that old boot over there. He gestured towards his wife, and I laughed as if the joke had been funny, and double-knotted my laces. You have the most beautiful eyes, croaked the old woman, cued by his gesture. You just don't see that color blue every day. I chuckled and thanked her. You folks have a good evening now, I said. Shouldering on my backpack, I pulled my hat low over my eyes to keep what I now realized blazing afternoon sun off my face. The blue of the hat's brim now occupied nearly half my visual field and obscured the old folks as I waved. You too, young fella. I looked up to see the old man return the wave and stumped back to his wife beside their Prius. Watching the hunched gentleman labor to cross that mere feet in the parking lot, I marveled that he'd been able to complete the trail's steep climb. Maybe the couple had kept their walk short. In any event, I set toward my goal, the path. The first mile or so of Lost Mines proceeds mostly uphill. Bristly flora frame the entire trail, and low brushes make it easy to forget that the path winds through the middle of the desert and not somewhere more hospitable. As the trail's switchbacks carve their way up the mountain, every few hundred yards a clearing in the foliage reveals a sweeping view of the surrounding landscape. I covered this first stretch in a little less than half an hour, hoping to capture the scenery for a new computer background. I paused in one of these open gaps in the foliage and pulled out my phone. The vista proved hard to photograph, though, and my efforts resulted in only a single passable shot. I dropped my phone back into my pocket and unscrewed my water bottle from the strap of my backpack. I took in the scenery as I drank. A snuffling sound interrupted my commune with nature. My stomach dropped and I spun my head in search of the noise. I'm a big guy, keep in mind, but I'm hardly a match for black bears that frequent this part of the park. I spotted it to the left, like coyote. I froze and watched the creature emerge from the brushes. It had its back to me and its head in one of the most prickly bushes off the trail. It continued snuffling around the foliage, and rummaging it was, bringing it closer to me. I slowly screwed the top back onto my water bottle. Coyotes usually don't attack people, but only in an emergency, and I could use the mostly full water bottle to bludgeon the beast if need be. The coyote raised its head and froze. It sniffed the air and slowly turned to face me. I locked eyes with it. The creature looked wrong. I seemed almost to have two snouts, one on top of the other. The deformity looked like a video game rendering error that kind of makes a virtual plant disappear into a wall and come out the other side. Like one snout had incorrectly rendered inside the other, and a tiny bit of a duplicate, just the nose, was poking through the coyote's face. I stared into the creature's wide, dark eyes for what felt like hours. Its noses twitched, both of them, as it sniffed the air. Easy, boy. I muttered the words, and the creature, in what I hoped to be a slow, calming whisper, "Take it easy." The beast stared, and I did not move a muscle. Then the coyote cocked its odd head to the side, and quickly, and so quickly that I still question whether it happened at all, it winked. Behind me a branch snapped and I spun. Finding nothing, I turned quickly back to the creature, but it was gone. Scared away? No doubt by the noise. Or me. I was breathing heavily. Far more heavily than my brief hike up the trail merited. I took a moment to collect myself. There more. I had seen deformed animals before. Goats with extra legs, deer with stubby little antlers. This coyote was just an accident of birth, the product of a twisted genome that had made it to adulthood. Surely hadn't actually winked at me, right? and even if it had, it was an animal, so it couldn't have been communicating anything more than a minor twitch, right? I carried on up the trail, trying not to think of it, but the image of the coyote and its bizarre double snout stayed with me. Around a mile and a half, I reached another clearing, and on the left-hand side of the path, the rest stop featured a bench carved from one of the sharp little trees, and I paused briefly to tighten the laces on my boots and take a sip from my Nalgene. As I screwed the cap back on, movement from the corner of my eye caught my attention once again. I spun, half expecting to find the coyote staring back at me. Instead, I found another hiker passing me on the trail. He was descending, however, heading in the opposite direction of me. The man wore brown hiking boots that rose mid-calf, gray socks extended from underneath, just a bit further up his calves, ending below olive green work shorts and the same color as my own. Unlike mine, however, his shorts lacked the little loop for which someone using them for manual labor might hang a hammer. They also lacked a little yellow C that marked the brand on the back right pocket. His blue baseball cap was pulled low enough that I didn't get a good look at his face, but I noticed that his gray shirt seemed entirely free of sweat. The man raised a hand as I turned, though didn't say anything. "How's the last stretch?" I asked as he passed to my right. "Easy." He rumbled the word in a deep baritone, not much louder than a whisper. Drawing it out, and in languid assurance, he continued down the trail. "How's the view?" I asked to his back. "Easy." I heard again in the same slow whisper before the hiker disappeared around the next switchback. I shook my head, not sure what to make of it, or even if I heard the guy correctly. As I gathered my belongings and finished lacing my boots, the sun was beginning to sink. I reached the trail's peak, a little less than a mile later, and was greeted by a sweeping view of a surrounding desert. By then, a brilliant sunset painted the desert, and I marveled at the view for nearly 20 minutes. As I made my way back down the trail, the temperature dropped with the sun. A cloudy evening obscured my views, and I had enjoyed the way up, and by the time I'd reached halfway down the trail, I'd used my flashlight on my phone to light the path in front of me. Hiking at night is always unnerving. I think everyone can agree with me. This wasn't my first time I'd been caught on the trail after sundown either, and the desert path was much less intimidating than some of the more heavily wooded trails in the other parks I've visited. Still, the normal sounds of wildlife become much more sinister, it feels, at night. As I descended, my thoughts turned back to the events of the day, and I'd woken up at the crack of dawn to make a long drive, and I didn't mind road trips, but the space between Austin and Big Bend was just empty. Not like one little town every couple miles empty, but completely. Bring a spare can of gas and make sure you fill up every time you see a station kind of empty. I'd really plumbed the depths of the podcast universe on my way, and even my favorite programs had run stale by the time I'd reached the welcome sign. What was it the ranger had said to me? Don't talk to the animals? I suppose a person has to be a bit odd to become a park ranger anyway, especially when out here in the middle of nowhere. Still, a strange thing to say nonetheless. The memory of my odd warning brought my mind back to the coyote, with its warped system error snout. I shuddered at the image. A branch snapped to my left. Wind whistled through the brushes. I sped up. A rock had found its way into one of my boots, and I bent to fish it out. The wind was whistling once again. I had held my phone in my mouth as I pulled one of my socks higher to make the boot a bit more accessible. The laces had loosened over the course of the day, and I could fit a finger down to the sole. I found a pebble. and worked it out of the shoe with my index finger. I rolled it just past the top lace, near the middle of my calf, and it was difficult to see the little gray stone, and it matched the color of my socks nearly exactly, and the low light did not help at all. I managed to grab it before it could fall back into my boots, and though I tossed it to the ground, into the brush along the side of the path, it made a small click as it landed. I stood and continued. I didn't get much more than a few steps before I felt a tiny impact on the side of my leg. Presuming I'd kicked up a stick that I'd been walking, I carried on. Yet another few steps, though, I felt another pebble in my boot. This one had not gotten as deep, and I didn't need my light to fish it out. I held it between my index finger and thumb. This, too, matched my socks. I tossed it just as the other one and carried on. A few steps later, I felt yet another impact, this time at my ear. A bug, surely. I paused briefly before speeding up. Crickets buzzed loudly, and their nighttime whine seemed to come from every direction at once. A branch snapped. I was nearly jogging by the time that I heard it. Easy. Slow. Down. Quiet. So quiet that I couldn't hear it at all, almost. I broke into a run. All around me, the trail seemed to come alive. Branches snapped in the wind. The crickets whistled and whined loudly. It was nearly deafening. My phone's light bounced as I ran. My backpack jostled uncomfortably on my back. A root caught my foot, and I threw my hands out to break my fall. The trail's tiny, sharp little rocks dug painfully into my knees and palms as I hit the ground. I scrambled to stand, and I looked up and found myself eye level with a pair of brown hiking boots. Easy. On my hands and knees, in the dust on the trail, bleeding to the grit, I froze. Strong hands hoisted me up from off the ground, and I could barely do anything at all but allow myself to be lifted. After what felt like an eternity, I raised my eyes. I had found myself face to face with the park ranger. Easy. She spoke in the same careful tone that she'd used when selling my admission ticket. Not the hiker's creepy whisper as I first thought. I caught my breath for a moment before I responded. Thanks. I dusted off my shorts and stepped back. Once I collected myself, I realized that I'd reached the end of the path and the ranger stood at the trailhead. My car was just a few feet away, and my light all over the parking lot illuminated us. The ranger was holding a shotgun. She wasn't pointing it at me precisely, but she certainly wasn't pointing it anywhere else either. If she had fired it, she'd probably blow off one of my toes. Behind her stood a couple that I'd seen on the way up the path. The old man stood straighter now than he had earlier in the afternoon, and he traded his walking sticks for a shotgun of his own. His wife, too, armed, and the three of them stood there unmoving, between me and my aging forerunner. None of them looked directly at me. In fact, each seemed to be looking pointedly at a spot where I wasn't. What did I tell you when you first came into the park this afternoon, friend? The ranger asked the question carefully, and without much inflection. She still didn't meet my eyes, staring instead at the path behind me. Given her monotone, I couldn't tell whether she was scolding me or testing me. Don't talk to the... I paused. The coyote. Don't talk to the animals, I finished. The ranger and her companions all visibly defeated as if they'd been holding their breath. Each one of them three finally turned their eyes to me, and the ranger shouldered her firearm. Friend, you get back to the car and you head straight out of this park. The old man commanded me in the gravity that could not possibly have come from the doddering old fellow that I'd met earlier in the day. Don't stop, not for nothing. The old woman added, or nobody. She fixed me with a steely gaze that had matched the gravity of the husband's, and not until you're out of the park, don't stop. I wouldn't worry too much about the speed limit either, friend, the ranger added. I opened my mouth to ask what in God's name the three of them were talking about, but the ranger fixed her jaw in such a way to indicate the conversation was over. The old couple, with similar expressions, and the three of them turned their full attention to the path, guns aimed at the ground. I followed their instructions. I didn't change my boots. I didn't take off my shirt, even though a day's worth of sweat had turned its gray material nearly the same color black as my car's upholstery. The Forerunner came to life with a deep rumble, and I stomped on the gas, peeling it out of the park lot with a squeal. My hands didn't stop shaking until I was nearly miles from the trailhead. The road in and out of the Big Bend is straight. It covers several miles between the park entrance and the trails. I'd finally begun to relax. I could see the ranger's booth in the distance when I heard it again. Easy. The same low whisper, so quiet, my rumbling engine nearly drowned it out. I spun my head in every direction. The sun was all the way down at this point, and I couldn't see much outside the too dim yellow glow of my headlights. I heard it again. Easy, boy. The same tone, the same whisper. Take it easy, boy. Faster this time, but not like a person who talked fast, like a video played at double speed. I continued to look frantically all around me, doing my best to keep the same attention to the road. Motion at the corner of my eye caught my attention. I turned my head to the right, and at the very edge of the half circle of illuminated in the headlights ran an animal. The animal looked like it had two snouts, one on top of the other. I stomped the gas. Easy. Loud, deafening, but still soft somehow, like a recording of a whisper played at full volume through an expensive sound system. The ranger sight grew larger in the distance, and I kept my attention to the road in front of me, but out the corner of my eye I could still see that damned coyote. The whatever it was still on the right in the edge of my headlights. I chanced to look at it, only for a moment. The sight still haunts me. On the edge of the road, just outside the light of my headlights, ran the coyote on its hind legs. Its twin snouts foamed and its mouth yawned open. As it panted, the creature's jaw opened wider than any natural being's ought to, and row upon row of human-looking teeth hung nearly to its chest, and it seemed to be wearing a gray t-shirt, but not wearing it precisely. Rather, the shirt seemed to almost grow from the creature's body, giving it seamlessly to a patchy fur on its arms and stomach. It turned its head and looked directly at me. Its eyes were no longer the wide brown eyes of an animal, but rather piercing blue eyes, like a human's, like mine. The coyote, it winked. I tore my gaze from the abomination to spare a glance at my speedometer. I was going 87, and I willed the aging SUV to go faster, and faster than it had any right to at this point. Faster than it ought have. Faster than whatever was keeping pace with me outside my window. I stole another glance at the creature. As I turned my head, I saw the beast stop. Not slow down, but stop completely, as if it had ran into a wall, and I whizzed past the ranger's hut, and then the welcome sign, and didn't ease up on the gas until both were firmly in my rear view. But I still heard it again. Take it easy. I slammed on the brakes, and I could smell the rubber burning from under my tires. Don't let the sound of your own wheels make you crazy. The eagles crooned on out of nowhere from my car's speaker, and I had service again. Scared me nearly half to death, it did. The song had carried on right from where I left it off from earlier. I put the old SUV in park right there in the middle of the road. Tears came freely down my face and cheeks, and my hand shook so violently that I could not have driven that car at that point, even if I'd tried. I don't know how long I sat there, parked in the middle of the West Texas highway, minutes, half an hour, hours. It was hard to tell. Once I'd pulled myself together, I called the Marfa Hotel where I'd intended to spend the night and canceled my reservation. I drove straight home, through the night and into the morning. I stopped only for gas and hardly took a breath until I reached my Austin apartment. I double-locked the door, the deadbolt, and the handle, pulled the blinds closed, and collapsed, exhausted, into my bed. I'm still not sure what the hell I saw out there in the desert, but the next morning I had thought for the first time, but certainly not the last, maybe the national parks aren't just there to preserve natural beauty. I want to say thanks again to my subscribers and those who find themselves coming back on the regular. Leave a like if you enjoy the content, and once again, make sure to bring a flashlight because it's dark in the shadows.